Welcome to the English Talk community. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm excited to be part of your journey to mastering English. Whether you're just starting out or looking to improve your skills, this community is here to support you every step of the way. I know that learning a new language can feel overwhelming at times, but that's exactly why this community exists. My goal is to make learning English as simple and enjoyable as possible for you. In this space, you won't find complicated grammar rules that are hard to understand, or endless lists of vocabulary words that seem impossible to memorize. Instead, I'll share practical tips, real-life stories, and everyday conversations to help you feel more comfortable and confident in speaking English. Here at the English Talk community, we're all about creating a friendly and supportive environment. You don't have to be afraid to make mistakes. In fact, I encourage it, because mistakes are an essential part of the learning process. You see, we all learn by doing, and each mistake brings us one step closer to improving. I've been there myself, and I understand the challenges you face. In this community, we focus on learning English in a way that feels natural. We'll start with simple conversations and build up from there. Whether you're learning English to advance your career, travel the world, or connect with new people, I'm here to make sure you have the tools and confidence to communicate effectively. Learning a new language is like learning to ride a bike. At first, it feels wobbly and you might fall a few times, but with practice, you'll get stronger and more confident. And I'll be right here, cheering you on and helping you along the way. So let's begin this journey together. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about how to take those first steps in learning English and why it's important to start with the basics. Now that you know a little more about what the English Talk community is all about, let's dive into the first step of your English learning journey, overcoming the fear of making mistakes. In the next chapter, I'll share some tips on how to embrace mistakes and use them to your advantage. This will set the foundation for building your confidence and moving forward in your learning process. Learning a new language can be a journey full of excitement and challenges. But one of the most common obstacles many people face is the fear of making mistakes. I remember when a close friend of mine, Sarah, first started learning English. She was so nervous about speaking because she didn't want to sound silly or say something wrong. Every time she tried to say a sentence, she would stop, second-guess herself, and eventually just give up. It was clear that fear was holding her back. She was afraid to make mistakes. But what she didn't realize at the time is that mistakes are not something to be afraid of. They're actually a crucial part of the learning process. When I spoke with Sarah about her struggles, I shared with her something that helped me when I was in her shoes. Mistakes are a sign that you're trying. They mean that you're stepping out of your comfort zone and learning. So I encouraged her to just keep talking, even if it wasn't perfect. Over time, she started to realize that mistakes are just stepping stones on the path to fluency. The more she spoke, the more she learned, and soon enough, her confidence grew. I know many people feel the same way Sarah did. You might be worried about mispronouncing words or not being understood. It's totally normal, but I want to assure you, everyone who speaks a language, even native speakers, makes mistakes. No one speaks perfectly all the time. And you know what? That's okay. For example, I once had a conversation with my colleague, Emma, who speaks English fluently. She was telling me how even now, as an adult, she still makes mistakes when speaking English. She shared a funny story about a time she was at a dinner party and said something completely wrong. She mixed up two similar-sounding words and ended up saying something totally unexpected. Everyone laughed, but instead of feeling embarrassed, she laughed too and learned something from the situation. It's stories like this that remind me that making mistakes is a normal part of the process. It's not a failure, it's a learning opportunity. When you make a mistake, you have the chance to improve, to grow, and to get better. So I want you to remember, don't be afraid of making mistakes. Embrace them. One thing that really helped Sarah was practicing without the pressure of being perfect. She started speaking to herself in English every day, out loud, just in her own space. And it made a huge difference. She wasn't focused on impressing anyone or saying everything just right. Instead, she focused on getting her thoughts out, making connections with the language and learning from her mistakes along the way. And it's not just about speaking. This applies to everything. Whether you're writing, listening, or reading, making mistakes is a natural part of the learning process. Every time you make an error, it's a moment where your brain is working, figuring things out and adjusting. So don't be afraid to get it wrong. Every mistake is another step toward fluency. When you make a mistake, you learn about the language itself. Maybe you'll mispronounce a word and someone will correct you. Or you'll use a phrase incorrectly and someone will help you understand the right way. That correction is a gift because it helps you learn. And the more you learn, the more confident you become. Mistakes are part of your progress, not something to be ashamed of. I've seen this with many of my students and friends who've learned English over the years. They were all afraid at first, just like Sarah. But once they started embracing their mistakes and seeing them as opportunities to grow, they made incredible progress. And I promise you, if you do the same, you'll see results too. One of my other friends, Rachel, used to be terrified of speaking English in front of other people. She would practice at home, but the moment she had to speak in a real conversation, she'd freeze. But one day, she decided to take a chance and joined an English conversation group. At first, she stumbled through the conversation, made mistakes, and felt a bit embarrassed. But you know what? That was the moment she turned a corner. The group was supportive and no one judged her for her mistakes. In fact, they all encouraged each other. Over time, Rachel became much more confident. The more mistakes she made, the better she got at speaking. So, my message to you is clear. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. They are a natural and essential part of learning. The key is to keep going, keep practicing, and keep embracing those mistakes. Because in the end, they're not obstacles. They're just opportunities to learn, grow, and get closer to fluency. As you continue your language learning journey, remember that it's okay to mess up. It's okay to sound imperfect. What matters most is that you keep moving forward, keep practicing, and most importantly, keep enjoying the process. Now, I want to share a story about my friend Carla, who recently moved to London. She was really excited, but also a little apprehensive because she knew that language was going to be a big challenge for her. She had been studying English for years, but always in a theoretical way with books and exercises. What she didn't expect was how much real-life language would affect her day-to-day life. On her first day at work, she had an experience that left her feeling a bit uncomfortable. When she walked into the office, her colleague said something like, "Let's grab a coffee sometime." She was completely lost. What did grab a coffee mean? She knew that grab could mean to take, but in that situation, she couldn't fully grasp the expression. So she did something important. Instead of staying silent, she asked, "What do you mean by grab a coffee?" Her colleagues explained it simply, and she realized that grab a coffee just means to go out and have a coffee with someone. That moment was a turning point for Carla. She realized that by practicing and listening to expressions like this, she could improve her understanding. The key was to listen to real, natural spoken English in daily situations and repeat those phrases. The constant practice of listening and repeating would help make these expressions more natural for her. No, sometimes it seems easier to learn from books because everything is nicely structured. But the real key to fluency is in listening and practicing. The more you expose yourself to real conversations, the more you will internalize the expressions and speaking patterns. Here's a tip for you. Whenever you hear a new phrase, don't just memorize it. Try repeating it, use it in your own sentences, and incorporate it into your daily life. This is what will make English feel more fluid and natural to you. Now think about your own experience. Have you ever encountered a situation where a common expression left you confused? How did you react when that happened? Think about. Now that we've talked about the power of repetition and how it helps you understand expressions, let's dive into another important aspect of language learning: embracing mistakes and learning from them. Let me tell you about another story, this time about my cousin Olivia. She had been studying English for years, just like Carla, and thought she was ready for anything. However, when Olivia first arrived in the United States, she quickly realized that the language was much more challenging than she had anticipated. Not only was the vocabulary different, but the pace at which people spoke made her feel overwhelmed. On her first week at work, her manager asked her to take a message over the phone. Olivia felt confident until she picked up the phone and heard the person on the other side speaking way too fast. She didn't catch everything, but instead of Pretending to understand, she paused, apologized, and asked, "Could you please repeat that?" At first, she felt embarrassed. She was worried that asking for clarification might make her seem unprepared or unprofessional. But then, she realized that everyone makes mistakes. Her colleagues reassured her and even helped her understand the message more clearly. They told her that asking questions showed she was eager to learn and improve, and it helped to avoid misunderstandings. This story is a great reminder that language learning doesn't come with a perfect, error-free path. Mistakes are a part of the journey, and they're something to embrace, not fear. The key is to learn from them. By asking questions and not being afraid to make mistakes, Olivia grew more confident. With each mistake, she learned something new and got better. Now, I'm sure you've made mistakes too, whether it's mispronouncing a word or misunderstanding a phrase. How did you handle it? Did you try to push through, or did you ask for clarification, just like Olivia did? Mistakes are your teachers in disguise. Every time you don't understand something, it's a chance for you to learn. So, when you're in a situation where you don't quite get something in English, don't be afraid to ask or even admit that you didn't understand. That's the best way to keep improving. Now that we've learned about the importance of embracing mistakes, let's talk about a new challenge that many learners face: dealing with slang and informal expressions. These can often be tricky, but once you start getting the hang of them, you'll find they're essential for sounding more natural in conversations. Let's explore that next. As I mentioned earlier, slang and informal expressions can be tricky when you're learning English. Even if you're comfortable with the basics, these phrases can throw you off guard. I remember a time when my friend Anna, who had been living in the UK for a few months, was really struggling with understanding some of the local slang. One day, Anna was having a casual conversation with her colleague Jane when Jane casually said, "I'm absolutely knackered after that meeting." Anna paused, trying to figure out what on earth knackered meant. She knew the conversation was about work, but knackered didn't make any sense to her. Now, Anna didn't want to ask about the word because she was afraid it might make her sound out of place. But later, when she went home, she decided to look it up. To her surprise, knackered simply meant tired or exhausted. This was just one of many examples of how people use informal expressions in everyday speech. One of the biggest challenges Anna faced, and one that you might face too, is that these slang terms often aren't taught in textbooks. They're phrases people use in conversations, but you won't find them in standard lessons. And because they're often cultural and regional, it's easy to miss them unless you've lived in an English-speaking country or have been exposed to native speakers regularly. The good news is that learning slang isn't impossible. It takes time and consistent exposure. The more you listen to how native speakers talk, whether it's through movies, TV shows, podcasts, or conversations, the more you'll start recognizing these expressions and eventually use them yourself. I suggest that next time you encounter an unfamiliar phrase, don't panic. Take a moment to ask or look it up. Over time, you'll accumulate a list of these informal phrases that will make you sound more natural and comfortable in English conversations. Now that we've covered slang, let's dive into another important skill: understanding idiomatic expressions. These are phrases that don't make sense if you translate them literally. But once you understand their meaning, they'll help you sound more fluent. Let's talk about a few examples. Idiomatic expressions can be a real challenge when you're learning a new language, especially English. These phrases often don't make sense if you translate them directly into your native language, which can make them confusing. But understanding and using idiomatic expressions is an essential part of sounding like a native speaker. I have a personal story about this. A few years ago, my cousin Sarah moved to the United States for work. She had studied English for many years and felt confident with her grammar and vocabulary. However, when she first started working, she quickly realized that everyday conversations were full of idiomatic expressions that left her puzzled. One day, during a meeting, her manager said, "Let's put a pin in it for now." Sarah froze for a second. What did that even mean? She thought to herself, "Do I need to find a pin?" But she quickly realized it wasn't literal. In this case, put a pin in it means to pause or temporarily stop discussing something. At first, Sarah felt embarrassed about not understanding it, but then she realized that this is just a part of language learning. Idiomatic expressions are incredibly common in casual conversations, and if you want to be fluent, you need to learn how to understand and use them. In fact, I encourage you to start paying attention to idioms in real conversations or media. Watch movies, listen to podcasts, or read books in English. Whenever you come across an idiom, make a note of it and try to understand its meaning and context. The more you practice, the more natural it will become. Now that we've discussed idioms, let's talk about a specific situation where idiomatic phrases are often used: workplace conversations. It's common to hear expressions in professional settings, and understanding them can make a big difference in your communication. Let's dive into that next. Workplace conversations are a huge part of our daily interactions, and understanding how to communicate effectively in a professional setting is crucial. Whether you're working with colleagues, meeting clients, or even just trying to understand office culture, knowing what to say and how to say it is essential. I want to share a story about my friend Tom. He had been working in an office in London for about 6 months when he found himself in a situation that many of us might have encountered, feeling out of place in a meeting. Tom had studied English for years, but the speed and tone of the conversation were a different story. During a team meeting, his manager said, "Let's circle back to this next week." Tom had no idea what that meant. He thought they were going to actually walk in a circle around the office. But of course, circle back simply means to revisit a topic later. At that moment, Tom felt a little lost. But instead of staying quiet, he decided to ask his colleague for clarification. Afterward, he felt much more confident. He realized that the key to improving in these situations is to not be afraid to ask questions. People don't expect you to know everything immediately, and asking for clarification shows that you're engaged and willing to learn. So, in your own work conversations, don't hesitate to ask questions if you don't understand something. Phrases like, "Could you clarify that?" or "Sorry, I didn't catch that. Can you repeat?" can help you navigate through situations where you might feel unsure. Now that we've talked about the workplace, let's look at another common situation where English learners might face challenges: social gatherings. Whether it's a dinner party or a casual chat with friends, understanding and participating in social conversations is an important skill. Let's dive into that next. Social gatherings are a big part of life, and they can be both exciting and intimidating, especially when English isn't your first language. It's easy to feel overwhelmed when you're trying to join in on a conversation with native speakers, especially if they're talking fast or using slang. But the truth is, these situations are often the best opportunities to practice and improve your speaking and listening skills. Let me tell you about a time when my friend Laura was invited to a dinner party in an English-speaking country. Laura had been practicing English for years, and she felt confident when it came to writing and reading, but speaking was a different story. At the party, she found herself surrounded by a group of people chatting about their weekend plans. Everyone was speaking quickly, and she felt a little out of the loop. One of the guests, Sarah, asked Laura, "So, what's your game plan for the weekend?" Laura was caught off guard. She had no idea what game plan meant in this context. Was Sarah asking about her actual plans for the weekend? Or was it something more complicated? Instead of pretending she understood, Laura decided to speak up. She said, "I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you mean by game plan." Sarah laughed and explained that it was just another way of asking what Laura planned to do over the weekend. It was a simple phrase, but it was new to Laura. And by asking, she not only learned something valuable but also felt more comfortable joining the conversation. Laura's experience taught her a very important lesson. Don't be afraid to ask questions, even in social situations. Asking for clarification shows that you're engaged and interested in what the other person is saying. It can even help build rapport with people. Over time, as you expose yourself to more casual conversations and learn new expressions, you'll feel more at ease in these social settings. One day during a meeting, her manager said, "Let's put a pin in it for now." Sarah froze for a second. What did that even mean? She thought to herself, "Do I need to find a pin?" But she quickly realized it wasn't literal. In this case, put a pin in it means to pause or temporarily stop discussing something. At first, Sarah felt embarrassed about not understanding it, but then she realized that this is just a part of language learning. Idiomatic expressions are incredibly common in casual conversations, and if you want to be fluent, you need to learn how to understand and use them. In fact, I encourage you to start paying attention to idioms in real conversations or media. Watch movies, listen to podcasts, or read books in English. Whenever you come across an idiom, make a note of it and try to understand its meaning and context. The more you practice, the more natural it will become. Now that we've discussed idioms, let's talk about a specific situation where idiomatic phrases are often used: workplace conversations. It's common to hear expressions in professional settings, and understanding them can make a big difference in your communication. Let's dive into that next. Workplace conversations are a huge part of our daily interactions, and understanding how to communicate effectively in a professional setting is crucial. Whether you're working with colleagues, meeting clients, or even just trying to understand office culture, knowing what to say and how to say it is essential. I want to share a story about my friend Tom. He had been working in an office in London for about 6 months when he found himself in a situation that many of us might have encountered: feeling out of place in a meeting. Tom had studied English for years, but the speed and tone of the conversation were a different story. During a team meeting, his manager said, "Let's circle back to this next week." Tom had no idea what that meant. He thought they were going to actually walk in a circle around the office. But of course, circle back simply means to revisit a topic later. At that moment, Tom felt a little lost. But instead of staying quiet, he decided to ask his colleague for clarification. Afterward, he felt much more confident. He realized that the key to improving in these situations is to not be afraid to ask questions. People don't expect you to know everything immediately, and asking for clarification shows that you're engaged and willing to learn. So, in your own work conversations, don't hesitate to ask questions if you don't understand something. Phrases like, "Could you clarify that?" or "Sorry, I didn't catch that. Can you repeat?" can help you navigate through situations where you might feel unsure. Now that we've talked about the workplace, let's look at another common situation where English learners might face challenges: social gatherings. Whether it's a dinner party or a casual chat with friends, understanding and participating in social conversations is an important skill. Let's dive into that next. Social gatherings are a big part of life, and they can be both exciting and intimidating, especially when English isn't your first language. It's easy to feel overwhelmed when you're trying to join in on a conversation with native speakers, especially if they're talking fast or using slang. But the truth is, these situations are often the best opportunities to practice and improve your speaking and listening skills. Let me tell you about a time when my friend Laura was invited to a dinner party in an English-speaking country. Laura had been practicing English for years, and she felt confident when it came to writing and reading, but speaking was a different story. At the party, she found herself surrounded by a group of people chatting about their weekend plans. Everyone was speaking quickly, and she felt a little out of the loop. One of the guests, Sarah, asked Laura, "So, what's your game plan for the weekend?" Laura was caught off guard. She had no idea what game plan meant in this context. Was Sarah asking about her actual plans for the weekend? Or was it something more complicated? Instead of pretending she understood, Laura decided to speak up. She said, "I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you mean by game plan." Sarah laughed and explained that it was just another way of asking what Laura planned to do over the weekend. It was a simple phrase, but it was new to Laura, and by asking, she not only learned something valuable, but also felt more comfortable joining the conversation. Laura's experience taught her a very important lesson. Don't be afraid to ask questions, even in social situations. Asking for clarification shows that you're engaged and interested in what the other person is saying. It can even help build rapport with people. Over time, as you expose yourself to more casual conversations and learn new expressions, you'll feel more at ease in these social settings. One of the most helpful things Laura did after that dinner party was to start listening to podcasts and watching TV shows in English. She would listen closely to how people in real-life situations were talking, paying attention to the phrases and idioms they used. The more she listened to natural conversations, the easier it became for her to understand and participate. So, if you ever find yourself in a social situation where you're unsure about something, take a deep breath and ask. It's better than missing out on an important part of the conversation. And, like Laura, you'll find that over time, you start feeling more confident and natural. Now that we've talked about navigating social gatherings, let's dive into something that many people struggle with: understanding idioms and expressions. These can be tricky because they don't always make sense when translated directly. But with a little practice, you'll be able to decode them and use them in your own conversations. One of the biggest hurdles for English learners is understanding idiomatic expressions. These are phrases where the meaning of the words isn't always directly tied to their literal meaning. For example, when someone says, "It's raining cats and dogs," they don't literally mean that animals are falling from the sky. It's just a colorful way of saying that it's raining heavily. I'll tell you a story about my friend Rachel, who had a hilarious experience trying to understand an idiom. Rachel had been living in an English-speaking country for a few months and was starting to get comfortable with everyday conversations. One day she was talking to her coworker Tom about her plans for the weekend. Tom said, "Well, you know what they say, Rachel, when the going gets tough, the tough get going." Rachel was a bit confused. "The going gets tough?" she thought. What on earth does that mean? She had never heard that phrase before. In her mind, she pictured people literally going somewhere when things got tough, like a bus ride or a hike. Not understanding the phrase, Rachel nervously laughed and said, "Yeah, I guess. I'll go tough." It was awkward, but Tom smiled and clarified what he meant. He explained that, when the going gets tough, the tough get going means that when things get difficult, strong people keep going and don't give up. Rachel's experience is a perfect example of how idioms can be confusing. But the good news is that once you start hearing these phrases more often, you'll begin to recognize them. You'll understand what people mean even if the words don't make sense at first. One helpful tip is to keep a notebook or digital list of idioms and expressions that you come across. Write down their meanings and examples of how they're used in context. You can even practice using them in your own sentences. The more you expose yourself to these expressions, the easier it will be to understand and incorporate them into your own speech. Let me tell you about how Rachel dealt with this after the conversation with Tom. She went home that evening and looked up a few more idioms, and by the end of the week, she had already learned 5 new phrases. She felt much more confident the next time she heard an idiom in a conversation. The next time Tom mentioned something about barking up the wrong tree, Rachel didn't blink an eye. She knew exactly what he meant. She was starting to feel like a native speaker, and it was exciting. Now that we've tackled idioms, let's talk about another important topic for language learners: the fear of making mistakes. Many people, especially beginners, feel anxious about speaking because they worry about saying something wrong. But what if I told you that making mistakes is actually a huge part of the learning process? In fact, it's one of the best ways to improve. Let me tell you about my cousin Mia. She's been learning English for a while, and just like many others, she had a fear of making mistakes. The first time she spoke in a meeting at work, she was so nervous that she stumbled over her words. She apologized immediately, even though no one seemed to mind. Mia was embarrassed, but she quickly learned something important. Everyone makes mistakes, and it's okay to mess up. I think this fear of mistakes is something many learners experience, especially in the beginning. But what if I told you that mistakes are actually a gift? Every time you make a mistake, you're learning. You're identifying an area where you need more practice, and that's exactly how you improve. Think about it. Even native speakers make mistakes all the time. Have you ever heard someone say something like, "I have went to the store yesterday"? That's not correct grammar, but it's something many people say. The key is to notice those mistakes and learn from them. In fact, the more you speak and practice, the less afraid you will be of getting it wrong. It's a natural part of the process, and the more comfortable you get with the language, the easier it becomes to speak without hesitation. Mia started realizing this after a few weeks. Every time she made a mistake, she would smile to herself, make a mental note of it, and then move on. She even started to look forward to those little errors because she knew that each one was helping her get better. And let me tell you something. When Mia started looking at mistakes as opportunities for growth, her confidence soared. She was able to speak more freely without overthinking every sentence. It was like a light bulb went off for her. And that's exactly what I want for you. Now that we've talked about mistakes, let's shift gears a little and focus on something that can really help you gain confidence: practicing speaking with others. One of the best ways to improve your fluency is by having conversations with people who speak the language, even if you're not perfect. In fact, these conversations can be more valuable than studying grammar rules for hours. One of the most important things you can do in your language learning journey is practice speaking. I'm sure many of you have heard this before, but it's true. Speaking with others is where real progress happens. And I know what you're thinking, but I'm not ready to have a conversation. My vocabulary isn't enough, and I'm afraid I'll sound silly. I get it. It's daunting at first. But let me tell you a story about my friend Olivia. She was in the same boat as you. She had studied English for years but was always afraid to actually speak. She thought she had to wait until her grammar and vocabulary were perfect before she could talk to someone. But here's the truth. You don't need to wait for perfection. Olivia finally decided to take the plunge. She joined an online conversation group, and at first she barely said a word. She would listen, nod, and try to understand everything. But slowly, something amazing happened. As she continued to practice, she became more comfortable. She realized that the people in the group weren't judging her, they were supporting her. No one cared about her mistakes, and they were just happy to hear her trying. The breakthrough came when Olivia started having one-on-one conversations with a friend from the group. She was nervous at first, but soon she realized that it wasn't as difficult as she thought. Her friend wasn't worried about her perfect grammar, and the focus was on communication, not perfection. Olivia began to feel more confident, and as she practiced, she got better. I think one of the biggest obstacles to speaking is the fear of sounding dumb or incompetent. But here's something that might surprise you. The more you speak, the less that fear will control you. Mistakes won't matter as much, and you'll start to enjoy the process. Remember, every conversation is an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to connect with someone new. Now that we've covered how important conversations are, let's talk about a tool that can help you improve your listening skills, which will make conversations even easier, listening to podcasts and watching videos in English. As we move forward in our English learning journey, let's talk about building confidence. It's one of the most powerful tools you can develop. Just like many of you, I've faced moments where I felt uncertain about my language skills. But one thing I've learned over time is that confidence doesn't come overnight. It's something we create for ourselves with consistent practice and small victories along the way. I think about a colleague of mine who had a big fear of speaking English. She was incredibly shy, and the idea of speaking in front of even one person made her anxious, but she was determined to improve. So she set a goal. Every day she would speak to herself in English for just 5 minutes. It wasn't about being perfect. It was just about getting comfortable with the act of speaking. At first, it felt strange. She'd stand in front of the mirror and talk about her day, explain what she was doing, or tell a story. Slowly, that small practice turned into something more. As she gained more confidence, she started speaking to friends in English. Then eventually, she found herself speaking with strangers in a more comfortable way. And now, she speaks confidently without the fear she once had. This story shows how powerful practice can be. Confidence doesn't magically appear. It's built little by little through consistent effort. But the best part? It's never about perfection. It's about being willing to try even if you're unsure. Every time you make an attempt, every time you push yourself out of your comfort zone, you are building that confidence. Another example comes to mind. One of my friends, who had been studying English for years, told me that she used to avoid speaking because she felt she was too slow. She would take too long to find the right words and would often pause during conversations, which made her feel embarrassed. But after some encouragement, she decided to stop worrying about speaking fast and instead focused on speaking clearly. She gave herself the permission to take her time and not rush. And guess what? By slowing down, she actually became more confident. She realized that fluency isn't just about speed, it's about clarity and communication. Now she speaks at her own pace and there's no hesitation in her voice. She has found a rhythm that works for her, and it's made all the difference. So my message to you is this. Practice is the foundation of confidence. Start where you are. Make small efforts every day. Whether it's speaking to yourself in English, reading aloud, or having short conversations with others, each step you take matters. Don't worry about sounding perfect. Instead, focus on improvement. Celebrate each small milestone. The more you practice, the more confident you'll become. And trust me, that confidence will empower you to keep moving forward in your English learning journey. As we continue on this path, let's talk about one of the biggest challenges many of us face: Real conversations. It's one thing to study English through books or online lessons, but when we actually have to speak in real-life situations, it can be a completely different experience. I know this from my own journey, and I've heard it from so many people in our community. It's easy to feel nervous when speaking English with others, especially if it's in an unfamiliar setting or with people you don't know well. I remember a time when I was just starting to practice English more actively. I was in a cafe, and there was a group of people speaking English at a nearby table. I felt a sudden urge to join the conversation, but my heart started racing. What if I made a mistake? What if I said something wrong? All these thoughts went through my head. But then I realized that the only way to improve was to take action. So I walked up to them and said, "Hi, I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. Mind if I join in?" It was a simple sentence, but in that moment it felt like a huge leap. They welcomed me into the conversation, and from there it just flowed. Sure, I stumbled over some words and had to think for a moment before responding, but that's part of the process. No one judged me. In fact, they were encouraging and appreciated that I was making the effort to speak. That experience taught me an important lesson. We tend to overthink and fear what others will think of us. But in reality, most people are just happy that we're trying to communicate. The more we step out of our comfort zone, the more we realize that these fears are often exaggerated in our minds. Another story that comes to mind is from one of my close friends. She had been learning English for a while, but she always avoided speaking in group settings. Her fear was that others would notice her mistakes. One day, she decided to challenge herself. She joined an English club that met once a week for casual conversation. The first few times, she felt nervous. She stumbled over some words, and there were moments of silence where she had to think about what she wanted to say. But by the third meeting, she started to feel more relaxed. She noticed that no one was judging her. In fact, they were supportive, and often encouraged her to keep going. This is something we all need to remember. Conversations are about connection, not perfection. People don't expect us to speak flawlessly. They want to understand us, and they appreciate the effort we put into communicating. The more we practice in real-life situations, the more comfortable we become with the process. So, the next time you're faced with the opportunity to speak in English, whether it's at work, with friends, or in any social situation, take a deep breath and go for it. Don't worry about mistakes. Every conversation, no matter how small, is an opportunity to improve. And remember, the more you practice, the easier it gets. I know from experience that listening can sometimes feel challenging, especially when you're exposed to fast-paced conversations or accents that you're not used to. It can be frustrating when you don't catch every word, and it can make you feel like you're falling behind. But let me tell you, it's completely normal to struggle with listening at first. When I first started practicing English, I used to feel overwhelmed whenever I listened to native speakers. They spoke so quickly, and there were moments when I couldn't understand everything they said. But just like with speaking, I didn't let this discourage me. Instead, I took it as an opportunity to improve. One thing I did was start listening to content that was specifically designed for English learners. There are so many podcasts, YouTube channels, and audiobooks made for people at different levels of language learning. They speak more slowly, clearly, and sometimes repeat key points to make sure you understand. This helped me build my confidence in listening. Over time, I moved on to more complex material, like movies or podcasts aimed at native speakers, and although it was tough at first, I got better. I also made a habit of listening to English while doing other activities like walking or cooking. This way, I wasn't just sitting and focusing on the language, but I was still absorbing it in the background. You'd be surprised how much you can pick up just from letting the language surround you. Another tip that helped me, and I've shared it with many learners, is to focus on context. If you don't understand a specific word or phrase, try to understand the overall meaning of the sentence. Even if you miss a few words, you can often guess the meaning based on the tone of voice, the situation, or the words that you do recognize. This will allow you to stay engaged in the conversation without getting stuck on individual words. Now, one of my friends had a completely different approach to improving her listening. She's a very visual learner, so instead of just listening to podcasts or watching shows, she combined it with subtitles in English. By reading the words on the screen while hearing them spoken aloud, she was able to match sounds to their written form. It helped her become more aware of pronunciation and spelling, and it also allowed her to keep up with fast speakers. The point here is that there are many ways to practice listening. You don't need to stick to just one method. Try a variety of techniques and find what works best for you. The more you listen, the easier it will become to understand native speakers and follow conversations. So, make listening a regular part of your practice, and remember that the more exposure you get, the more you'll improve. In the previous chapter, we focused on listening, but today we're going to talk about another crucial skill in mastering English, reading. Reading is one of the most effective ways to improve your vocabulary and understanding of sentence structures. Just like listening, reading allows you to see how words and phrases are used in context, which makes learning new vocabulary much easier. When I was learning English, I spent a lot of time reading books, articles, and blogs. At first, I stuck to materials that were easy to understand, like children's books and short stories. It was important for me to start with things I could grasp so I wouldn't feel discouraged. Over time, as my vocabulary expanded, I started reading more complex texts, such as novels and news articles. One thing I want to highlight is the importance of reading regularly. The more you read, the more words you'll encounter. It's amazing how much vocabulary you can learn just by reading in context. Plus, when you see words repeatedly, it helps you remember them better. This is why I recommend making reading a daily habit, even if it's just for 15 to 20 minutes a day. That small effort will add up over time. A key tip for improving your vocabulary through reading is to keep a notebook with you. Whenever you come across a new word or phrase, write it down, along with its meaning and an example sentence. Later, you can review these words and try to use them in your own conversations or writing. By actively engaging with the vocabulary, it becomes much easier to remember and incorporate it into your language skills. I also found that reading aloud helped me a lot with pronunciation. I didn't just read silently in my head. I would read out loud, paying attention to how each word sounded. This helped me get comfortable with the rhythm and flow of the language. I also recommend this for anyone struggling with pronunciation or fluency. It's a great way to practice speaking while building your vocabulary. Now, here's something I've shared with a few learners who are just getting started with reading. If you find a passage that's challenging, don't rush through it. Take your time to understand each word and its meaning. You can break the passage down into smaller chunks and try reading it again, focusing on comprehension. This approach helped me feel more confident when I tackled more difficult texts. And remember, it's okay to look up words you don't know. That's part of the learning process. Another friend of mine, who was learning English at the same time I was, decided to read novels by authors she admired. The catch, though, was that she started with books in the original English versions, not translations. Yes, it was harder at first, but she pushed through it, and over time, she gained not only a better understanding of the language, but also a deeper connection to the culture. Reading books in their original language really helped her see the nuances of idioms, expressions, and wordplay that don't always translate well. If you're unsure where to start, try reading books, articles, or blogs related to topics that interest you. When you read something that excites you, it's easier to stay engaged and motivated. And as you read more, you'll notice improvements not just in your vocabulary, but also in your overall comprehension of English. In the next chapter, we'll look at how practicing writing can complement both your reading and listening skills. Writing is a great way to reinforce what you've learned and apply it in a meaningful way. Now that we've discussed the power of reading, let's dive into the importance of writing. Writing is one of the most powerful ways to reinforce everything you've learned so far. It helps you actively engage with the language, and it allows you to practice using the new words and grammar rules that you've come across in your reading and listening activities. When I started writing in English, I wasn't too confident, but I knew that writing would help me solidify my understanding of the language. At first, I kept it simple, writing short paragraphs about my day or my hobbies. The more I practiced, the more I felt comfortable expressing myself in writing. Here's a helpful tip. Try to write something every day, even if it's just a few sentences. This will help you form a routine, and before you know it, you'll be writing longer and more complex texts. I often wrote about my daily experiences, but you can also write about anything that interests you. The key is to practice regularly and challenge yourself with different topics and styles of writing. For example, When I was first learning, I challenged myself to write short stories. These stories allowed me to use new vocabulary and experiment with different sentence structures. I also paid attention to how native English speakers wrote, which helped me improve my style. And yes, it was a bit challenging at first, but with time, I started to feel more comfortable. Writing doesn't just help you practice vocabulary, it also helps you with grammar. When you write, you're actively thinking about how sentences are structured and how different tenses are used. This kind of practice can greatly improve your understanding of grammar, especially when it comes to tricky areas like articles, prepositions, and sentence agreement. If you're unsure about how to start writing in English, don't worry. You can begin with simple things like journaling, writing short emails, or even creating a blog. The important thing is that you practice writing regularly, so you get used to the flow of English sentences. One of my friends who was struggling with grammar started writing short essays about the things she loved, like her favorite movies or books. She would focus on one specific aspect each time, like describing the characters or explaining the plot. By writing essays on topics she was passionate about, she not only improved her grammar, but also built her vocabulary. Plus, she found it fun, and that kept her motivated to keep going. Another method I found effective was writing responses to questions or prompts from online forums or social media groups. These short exchanges allowed me to interact with others in English, and by doing so, I was able to see different ways people express themselves. It helped me to adjust my own writing style and feel more comfortable using English in real conversations. And, of course, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Writing is a process, and no one writes perfectly the first time. The key is to keep improving with every piece you write. If you can, ask a native speaker or an advanced English learner to review your writing. They can give you valuable feedback on how to improve. In the next chapter, we'll talk about how you can combine all the skills we've discussed, listening, reading, writing, and speaking, into an effective study routine that will accelerate your progress. Now that we've covered different aspects of language learning, it's time to bring it all together. One of the best ways to make consistent progress in your English learning journey is by creating an effective study routine that incorporates listening, reading, writing, and speaking. It's important to balance these skills to develop fluency in all areas of the language. When I started, I didn't have a clear routine. I would sometimes read a book or watch a video in English, but I didn't do it consistently. The moment I started setting a schedule for my studies was when I began to see real progress. A study routine helps you stay focused, organized, and committed to your goals. One way to organize your routine is by dedicating specific days or times to different skills. For example, you could dedicate Mondays and Wednesdays to reading, Tuesdays, and Thursdays to writing, and Fridays to speaking practice. Listening can be integrated into any part of your day, such as while commuting or during your morning coffee. Here's a breakdown of how I structured my study routine. Morning, start the day with a 10-minute listening exercise. I would listen to a short podcast or watch a video in English, paying attention to pronunciation and new vocabulary. Afternoon, dedicate 30 minutes to reading. I would read articles, books, or news stories in English. I would highlight new words and look them up to expand my vocabulary. Evening, spend 20 minutes writing. I would either write in my journal or work on short essays. This practice helped me reinforce everything I had learned that day. Speaking. Practice speaking at least 15 minutes a day. This could be by repeating phrases I had heard during my listening practice or speaking with a friend or language partner. The key here is consistency. Even if you only have a short time each day, use it wisely. Try not to overwhelm yourself by setting too many tasks. Start small and gradually increase the time and complexity of your studies. I know that life can get busy, and sometimes it's hard to stick to a routine, but I found that setting a fixed time each day made it easier to stay on track. For instance, I would wake up just 20 minutes earlier to fit in a quick listening exercise or write a short paragraph. That small effort went a long way toward improving my skills over time. If you feel like you're not making progress, try mixing up your routine. Sometimes doing the same activities can become repetitive, and your motivation might dip. Experiment. With different resources like audiobooks, online courses, or language exchange apps to keep things fresh and interesting. One of the people I know who was struggling with consistency began using a language learning app to track their progress. They set small goals, like learning 5 new words every day, and the app would remind them to practice. This helped them stay motivated, and after a few weeks, they had learned hundreds of new words. Another friend of mine joined a study group, where everyone practiced speaking and writing in English. The group held weekly meetings, and they would discuss topics like travel or food in English. This not only gave them speaking practice, but also added an element of accountability to their routine. In the next chapter, we'll dive into how to stay motivated and overcome the challenges that come with learning a new language. Learning a new language can be incredibly rewarding, but it's also filled with its fair share of challenges. There will be days when it feels like you're not progressing, or you might struggle with certain aspects of English. These moments are completely normal, and it's important to know how to stay motivated through them. In the early stages of my journey, I often felt frustrated when I didn't understand something or couldn't express myself as clearly as I wanted. However, I learned to embrace these challenges as part of the process. They weren't signs that I was failing, they were signs that I was pushing myself to grow. One thing that really helped me stay motivated was remembering why I started learning English in the first place. For me, it was to connect with people from different cultures, expand my career opportunities, and access more resources in English. Keeping this bigger picture in mind helped me stay focused, even when the process felt slow. Another way I kept motivated was by celebrating the small victories. I didn't wait until I was fluent to acknowledge progress. I celebrated when I learned new vocabulary, when I understood a sentence without having to translate it, or when I successfully communicated, something I couldn't a few weeks ago. These small wins kept my spirits high. One technique that worked for me was setting micro goals. Rather than aiming for an abstract goal like becoming fluent, I broke it down into smaller, achievable milestones. For instance, I aimed to learn 10 new words a week, or finish 1 chapter of a book in English every month. These small, achievable goals helped me stay focused and motivated. But there were times when I felt really stuck. I remember a particular moment when I felt like my progress had plateaued. No matter how much I studied, I wasn't feeling the same excitement or improvement I had before. I decided to change things up, and that made all the difference. I tried a new approach to my studies by incorporating more interactive resources, language exchange apps, speaking with native speakers, and listening to podcasts on topics I was passionate about. That shift helped me regain my motivation. Overcoming frustration is key. When you feel discouraged, remind yourself that learning a language is a journey, not a race. Be patient with yourself and acknowledge that setbacks are part of the learning process. One person I know found that taking a short break helped when they felt overwhelmed. After a couple of days, they returned to their studies feeling refreshed and ready to tackle new challenges. Some days will be harder than others, and that's completely okay. Learning English or any language is not always a linear process. There will be ups and downs, and it's important to be kind to yourself during the tough times. A friend of mine, for example, began to lose motivation when they hit a language barrier at work. They couldn't express themselves as confidently as they would have liked in a meeting, and they felt embarrassed. But instead of giving up, they reflected on the situation, identified what went wrong, and took action to improve. They made it a point to practice English daily and started to see improvements. Remember, motivation isn't something that will always come easily. Some days it requires extra effort. But when you focus on the small wins, the progress will add up over time. And when you hit those plateaus, remember that it's just part of the process, and you'll break through eventually. In the next chapter, we'll talk about the importance of community and how finding people who share your language learning journey can help keep you motivated. Building confidence in speaking English can be one of the most challenging aspects of language learning. Many of us feel nervous or self-conscious when speaking, especially if we're not sure whether we're pronouncing things correctly or using the right words. But here's something I've realized over time. The key to improving your speaking skills is simply to practice. The more you speak, the more comfortable and confident you'll become. It's okay to make mistakes, and actually, making mistakes is one of the fastest ways to learn. Take a moment to think about how you feel when you're in a conversation in English. Maybe you've had moments where you were unsure of what to say or you worried about how you sounded. I know I've been there before. but it's important to remember that everyone, no matter how fluent they are, has gone through the same process. I remember a time when a friend of mine, Lily, was visiting an English-speaking country for the first time. She knew the language pretty well from her studies, but when she had to speak with native speakers in a real conversation, she felt intimidated. She would hesitate, second-guess herself, and sometimes even avoid speaking altogether. One day, she had no choice but to speak up. She was ordering coffee at a cafe, and the barista asked her a simple question: for here or to go? Lily froze for a second, unsure of how to respond, but she decided to take a deep breath and answer confidently, to go. And guess what? She did it. From that moment on, Lily started to realize that speaking wasn't as difficult as she had made it seem. Sure, there were moments of uncertainty, but each time she practiced, she got a little better. Little by little, her confidence grew. If you're struggling with this, I want to encourage you. Start with small conversations. Try speaking with friends or even talking to yourself in English. The more you practice speaking, the more your confidence will grow, and soon you'll be able to speak without thinking twice about it. Let's move on now and talk about another important aspect of language learning: listening skills. When it comes to language learning, listening is just as important as speaking. In fact, improving your listening skills can have a huge impact on your overall fluency in English. If you can understand spoken English more easily, you'll feel more confident in conversations, and you'll be able to absorb new vocabulary and grammar naturally. One of the best ways to improve your listening skills is to expose yourself to different types of spoken English. This could include watching movies, listening to podcasts, or even tuning in to English language radio stations. The key is to find material that is both interesting and appropriate for your level. If the content is too difficult, you might get discouraged, and if it's too easy, you won't make much progress. I remember when I first started listening to English podcasts. At first, it was difficult for me to catch everything, especially when the speakers spoke quickly or used slang. But I didn't let that discourage me. I would listen to the same podcast episode several times, each time trying to understand a little more. Gradually, I began to pick up on words and phrases I didn't notice before. My understanding of spoken English improved, and I started to feel more comfortable listening to a wide range of English speakers. Another helpful tip is to focus on context. Even if you don't understand every word, you can often figure out the meaning from the situation or from the words you do recognize. It's like piecing together a puzzle. Over time, you'll find that your brain becomes better at recognizing patterns in the language, and you'll be able to understand more with less effort. Additionally, don't be afraid to use subtitles or transcripts at first. They can help bridge the gap between what you hear and what you understand. As your listening skills improve, you can start using them less, challenging yourself to listen without reading the text. But remember, it's okay to rely on them at the beginning. Listening is a skill that improves with time and practice. The more you expose yourself to English, the more you'll start to notice improvements. And remember, it's not about understanding every single word. It's about getting the overall message and understanding the meaning behind the conversation. Now that we've discussed listening, let's explore another key skill in language: learning, reading. Let's talk about how reading can help you expand your vocabulary and improve your overall language proficiency. Reading is one of the most effective ways to improve your English. When you read, you not only get exposed to new vocabulary, but you also see how grammar is used in context. This can help you internalize correct sentence structures and become more fluent in speaking and writing. A great way to start is by reading material that you genuinely enjoy. Whether it's a novel, a blog, or even social media posts in English, the important thing is to find something that holds your interest. When you're engaged with the content, it makes learning feel less like a chore and more like an enjoyable activity. I remember the first time I picked up an English novel. At first, it was a bit difficult to get through the pages, especially since I didn't know every word. But I didn't stop. I highlighted words I didn't understand and looked them up later. Gradually, my vocabulary expanded, and I became more confident in reading longer and more complex texts. Another tip is to read out loud. This can help with pronunciation and fluency. When you read out loud, you're practicing speaking without the pressure of having to come up with your own sentences. Plus, hearing the words in your head as you read can reinforce their meaning and improve retention. It's also helpful to read in different genres: Fiction, nonfiction, news articles, and academic papers all use different styles of language. This will expose you to a variety of vocabulary and expressions, and it will help you get used to different writing styles. Over time, you'll start to notice patterns in the language and your comprehension will improve. Don't worry if you don't understand everything at first. The goal is not to understand every single word, but to grasp the general meaning of the text. As you continue reading, you'll notice that you're able to pick up more and more words naturally, without having to look them up. Reading is a long-term skill that grows over time. The more you practice, the easier it becomes. So, make it a habit to read every day, even if it's just for a few minutes. Consistency is key, and before you know it, you'll have built a solid foundation of vocabulary and comprehension. Now let's talk about how to practice speaking, the key component in becoming fluent in English. Let's explore some ways to boost your speaking confidence and skills. As we reach the end of this episode, I hope you've gained some valuable insights into how real-life experiences can shape your English learning journey. From challenging conversations to unexpected phrases, we've seen how real-world situations are essential for building confidence and fluency. Remember, the more you expose yourself to these situations, the more comfortable you'll become. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you experienced any of these challenges or funny misunderstandings while speaking English? Share your stories with us in the comments below. Let's create a space where we can all learn from each other. Your experiences will help others who might be facing the same challenges, and together we can keep improving our skills. And don't forget, if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe to the English Talk community. We're here to support each other, and by subscribing, you'll stay up to date with all our future episodes designed to help you along your learning journey. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to hearing from you. Keep practicing, stay motivated, and remember, every challenge is an opportunity to grow.